Good evening, everyone, and good morning to our international participants, and welcome to this virtual event. Thank you for being with us tonight. My name is Bodo Mann. I'm the CEO and Managing Director of Auticon Australia, and I have the privilege of leading this amazing team here in Australia. This evening, we have the pleasure, or I have the pleasure tonight to be your facilitator. And before we get into it, there are a few things I would like to address. So firstly, I would like to acknowledge, do the acknowledgement of country. So also we are meeting virtually. We would like to acknowledge the traditional owner of this country on which we meet today, the Gadigal people of the Eora Nation, and recognize their continued connection to land, waters, and culture. We pay our respect to their elders, past, present, and emerging. ACS remains committed to provide their members with premium event and top quality content through this period. And so therefore, there are a few things we should probably address before I introduce the speakers for tonight's event. I would like to bring to your attention some important information regarding the CPD hours. When attending virtual events, in order to claim and qualify for the required CPD hours, you must attend the online event in its entirety, which will be tracked by the ACS events team. If you are using a cloaking software program, your attendance cannot be recorded and the CPD hours cannot be allocated. So it would be a shame. So this does not include the use of VPN. So please allow for up to 2 weeks for CPD to be allocated to your membership profile. One or two more housekeeping items just to cover. This webinar is being recorded and the recording will be shared after the webinar. The session will go for about an hour. Our speakers, Jen, Simon, and Ashlea, and I will introduce in a second, will be included in this evening's panel discussion, and they will be answering all of your questions at the end of this discussion. If you have any questions during the event, please remain muted and use the question function on the top right of your screen. In terms of, let me just follow the slideshow here. If you have, sorry, we're here. So don't be shy when it comes to social media. Please feel free to share it. I think the topic we're discussing is certainly of interest for many people. So I think social media lends itself. You should maybe just use the hashtag #ACSNSW. That would help that effort. So let me just go here. So the theme for tonight's event is neurodiversity to enhance IT innovation. So innovation, and maybe together with corporate culture and staff engagement, I would say are seen as the holy grail to sustainable business success. Therefore, the billion-dollar question for all of us is how to achieve that process of genuine innovation, especially across technology. We endeavor this evening to provide some insightful answers for you, and hopefully with your help, we can elaborate and expand that topic. Allow me to provide a 2-minute overview in terms of Auticon, and I would like to attempt to introduce the concept of neurodiversity, so just bear with me. So in terms of Auticon, and I like to use the threefold social impact model here to the right. So we're an international IT consulting company, and we exclusively employ talent on the spectrum. And we've been in existence since 2011, and we've been now in 8 countries. About a year ago, we started in Australia. And unique support model, which supports basically our business and operating model. And that is, we have our own psychologists, we call them job coaches, and we have our own project managers to not just support our consultants, but also coach and provide additional support to our clients. And if you look at the context, we're facing an underemployment rate of 90% and an unemployment rate of 34% for people on the spectrum. So there's a huge potential in terms of leveraging that cognitive strength. And that is certainly our mission, to provide some more meaningful job opportunities and careers. And doing that, helping clients explore concepts like innovation and enhanced productivity. Last worthwhile mentioning is we typically operate in 4 pillars in terms of data analytics, software engineering, quality assurance and testing, and most recently also in the cybersecurity space. Useful somehow try to frame the terminology and the concept of neurodiversity, and this is actually very difficult. So allow me to do that with basically 2 quotes, and these are people who are much better equipped. So the first one is really autism isn't a processing error, it's a different operating system. This came actually from one of our consultants. And then the other quote I would like to use is from Judy Singer, an Australian sociologist, and much better equipped than myself to attempt that, is that she described it as neurodiversity simply names an indisputable fact about our planet that no 2 human minds are exactly alike, and uses it to name a paradigm for social change. If you're putting that into the workplace, she expressed it very eloquently. In the workplace, it is the idea of inclusivity that extends to neurological differences, including hiring and retaining talent with neuro variations such as autism or ADHD or dyslexia. And that really goes to the core of what we want to discuss here tonight. Lastly, Simon, who I'm going to introduce in a second, just published a new book, which is a fascinating read. So I encourage the first 25 professional members, if you're interested in Auticon as a topic, please reach out. And as a little sweetener, we just will hand out 25 free copies, and you will find it a fascinating read. There's also obviously a website then associated with that. So having said that, I would like to basically provide a brief introduction to our 3 panel members. And I'm very excited, ladies first, to welcome Ashlea McKay, Jen Cole, and then we have Professor Simon Baron-Cohen joining us live from the UK. So thanks very much for getting up early. And in order to just give you a little bit more flavor, so Ashlea is a senior user experience researcher. She's a keynote speaker, a writer, and the diversity and inclusion leader. So she brings a vast of experience, industrial design background to her role. And she describes herself as a proud and late diagnosed autistic woman, and is passionate about unconditional acceptance-based autism and neurodiversity, inclusion in the workplace and beyond. So I'm looking forward to hear Ashlea's view and insights. Jen Cole, she is our lead coach at Auticon Australia, and she has over 15 years of deep experience with autism. Is passionate about empowering and educating parents, colleagues, and people in the workplace with autism or working with people on the spectrum. She holds a Bachelor of Science, majoring in psychology at the University of Plymouth, and is just, an absolute rock and pillar within our small team in Australia. And last but not least, Professor Simon Baron-Cohen, world-renowned expert in terms of psychology and autism. He's a professor at the Department of Psychology and Psychiatry at the University of Cambridge. He's a fellow at the Trinity College, Cambridge, and the director of the Autism Research Center in Cambridge. There's an endless publication and books he published. Among others, he had a keynote address to the United Nations in New York in 2017 to the International Autism Awareness Day. And his latest book, as I mentioned, is a fascinating read. So thank you, all 3 of you, for joining us. And certainly we're all very excited to have you. So with having said that, and I'll try to stick to the time limit, let me just dive into the questions straight away. And we divided it in 3 sections. And the first really is around how neurodiverse workers are essential to foster innovation and invention. And Simon, you published more than 600 peer reviews, countless books. And what are some of the main findings you've made when it comes to the way people on the spectrum approach innovation and invention? Simon, can I just hand over to you?
Sure. Thank you very much, Bodo. I hope everybody can hear me speaking all the way across the planet. So it's a great pleasure to be with Auticon and with your audience and the panel today. Before I answer your question, I just want to also say how proud I am to be on the board of Auticon UK. And we're talking today on Autism Awareness Day. So this is a great celebration of neurodiversity. Auticon, as you mentioned, is one of the only companies I know of that exclusively hires autistic people. And it's addressing the very serious concern that certainly in my country, the majority of autistic adults are unemployed. But let's go straight to your question. What can autistic people contribute to companies, to different kinds of sectors in terms of innovation and invention? Well, our research shows that autistic people have a whole bunch of strengths, even talents, that have been neglected. Traditionally, we've been looking at autism as a disability, a disorder, even a disease. So in quite sort of negative ways. There's no question that autistic people have a disability. That's why they need the diagnosis. But autism is more than just a disability. So what are the strengths? Well, one of them I would say is fantastic attention to detail. A second one is excellent ability to identify patterns. And that's why my book is called The Pattern Seekers, that autistic people are drawn to patterns. And in my book, what I argue is that patterns, particular kinds of patterns, are the basis of any system. Whether we're talking about mechanical systems, like a car engine, or whether it's an abstract system like coding, or whether it's a natural system like the weather, or a musical system like a musical instrument or a piece of music, a mathematical system. We are surrounded by systems, and the basis of a system is these special patterns, which I call if and then patterns. If I take something and I make a change to it, then I get a particular result. And autistic people love to identify these patterns, these if and then, very logical patterns. First of all, to confirm that the patterns are true. It's like the laws that govern any system. If I take the number 2 and I cube it, then I get the number 27. And you get the same result every time. And autistic people love predictability. They love rules. But where it comes to invention or innovation is that once we've identified a pattern, we can start playing with the patterns. We can start experimenting by what happens if I change the input. Instead of taking the number 2, what happens if I take the number 3? Or you can change the operation. Instead of, for example, cubing that number, you could square the number and you get a different result. And if it's a new pattern, that is an invention. So, our research shows, first of all, at the psychological level, autistic people are above average in pattern recognition. They also have very good memory for patterns and rules and facts. They like to go deeply to understand a system in a lot of detail. They'll stay on task. Clinically, sometimes this is called being obsessive, having obsessional interests, but I think we can see it in a much more positive light. This is a great asset to any workplace or in education. And most importantly, I think that we're now recognizing neurodiversity is another form of diversity that we need in the workplace, because if we have teams that are made up of different kinds of minds, people who think differently, then we're going to get fresh ideas, new perspectives, and that is another source of innovation. I could carry on, but let me start with that.
No, I think that's fascinating. And maybe Ashley and Jane, feel free to jump in, but are there any obvious examples which come to mind when we're talking about like innovation, which allowed mankind to are there any obvious examples we can think of?
So when you're talking about mankind or humans, in my book, I kind of trace invention all the way back through evolutionary time, to the first complex tools. It dates back to about 75,000 years ago, when suddenly in the archaeological record, we see the first bow and arrow, which follows this if and then logic. If I take an arrow and I attach it to a stretchy fiber and release the tension, then the arrow will fly. It's got this if and then logic. But 40,000 years ago, we see the first musical instrument, which was a flute made out of a bone, found in a cave in Germany, actually. And again, if we try to imagine the inventor of this, the first musical instrument, they were thinking, if I blow down the hollow bone and I cover the hole, then I make a particular note. So it's the if and then logic. And as I mentioned, autistic people, they're strongly attracted to finding these if and then rules and then experimenting with them. And you see this, in music, autistic people throughout time have made contributions to music. Not always diagnosed. So I'm thinking of the classical pianist Glenn Gould, who was a fantastic classical musician, but he always needed to go to the same restaurant every night at 2 a.m. after his concerts, sit at the same table, order the same food. He needed a lot of predictability in his life. And we see this with many, historically, many inventors. Thomas Edison, who I describe in the book, we know him as the inventor of the first electric light bulb, but he was inventing non-stop, but he had a lot of autistic traits. So, for example, he was obsessed with Morse code as a teenager. Morse code is all about patterns, and he even named his 2 children Dot and Dash after Morse code. And his wife moved a mattress into his workshop because he was experimenting all day and all night. So he was totally focused on experimenting, on playing with patterns. But these are just kind of anecdotes. We know from research. Yeah.
Right.
I was just going to say that anecdotes about individuals in history, that's not really evidence, but we know from our research that when we go into the population, for example, we did a study of over 500,000 people and looked at people who are working in STEM, science, technology, engineering, or maths, and people who are not working in STEM. We find people working in STEM have a higher level of autistic traits when you measure them using a questionnaire. So these are showing links between aptitude in understanding systems and how many autistic traits you have.
I think it's fascinating. I think, Jane, you might have a suggestion as well. And Ashley, by all means, before we talk about a more personal dimension and experience. But Jen, do you have an example just at hand? I think you're mute, Jen.
Thank you. I was just going to give an example of something that's sort of happened fairly recently for one of our consultants, and it's picking up from what Simon's saying in terms of that pattern recognition. So he was actually assigned a task in a particular project, but he was starting to recognize things that were happening outside of what his project was. And so he actually approached his sort of team members and his senior at the organization and sort of said, I'm starting to pick up these patterns. I actually think that if I were to look into it in more detail, I might be able to support you in terms of the infrastructure and the architecture of the organization. So if you give me time to do that, then, you know, I might be able to help you think of some solutions in this area. And it was something that the organization themselves hadn't even thought of. And it wasn't something he was assigned to do, but it just naturally came to him through his work that he was doing, that he was starting to pick up on some of these things. And so now that's something he's going to be tasked with, which is a fantastic sort of solution for them.
Also thinking out of the box just comes to mind with the ability to look at a problem in a different way, in a different light, which is exactly what companies trying to chase in terms of how can I lift the collective ability to look at problems in a different way. And we've seen that, you know, every day in terms of where our consultants work with clients, and that is one of those fantastic abilities. Sorry, if you want to say something.
I just wanted to point out that there is a lot of diversity within the neurodiversity, and that diversity shapes our experiences, as does, of course, intersectionality. And some of us are multiply diverse, and some of us don't even know we're neurodiverse. So I think that there's a lot of complexity in there, and it's something that we need to be.
It's actually a perfect bridge. Thanks for bringing it up, because I would like to overlay a more personal dimension to the conversation. And Ashlea, I think you were diagnosed in your late 20s, and it would be very helpful to understand your view in terms of sharing your story. Like, how did this evolve? How were you diagnosed? That would be very helpful, I think.
Yeah, absolutely. So I was diagnosed when I was 29 years old. I spent the first 30 years of my life feeling like I had been dropped off on an alien planet and was just waiting for someone to come back and get me. I didn't fit in anywhere. Everything I said, thought, did, and felt was just wrong. I always felt really out of step with the world. It was quite isolating. So I would like work hard to try and be like everyone else and try to fit in. And I now know that's called masking. But, you know, and it was really tough. And all I wanted was acceptance and belonging. And I reached a point in my mid-20s where I wondered what might happen if I just accepted myself, if that might be enough. And it was. Once I reached the point where I thought, well, hey, you know, maybe being different is actually kind of cool, I needed to know why. I needed to know why I was so different. So I started doing research. I started talking to people. I had a friend who was diagnosed with ADHD in her 30s, and she encouraged me to, you know, really kind of look into it, not for anyone else, but for myself, to get an understanding of what makes me me. And I was diagnosed 5 years ago next month. And you know, it really was quite a journey. That news kind of turned my world upside down for about 2 years, and then everything was really good. I think, like, I finally have the right framing for how I view the world. And it, you know, it was funny we were talking about disability earlier. I identify as disabled, and I find it quite positive and empowering, in many ways affirming, because I am disabled, but not so much by my autism, but by the barriers in society and community attitudes. And that's why I write and talk so much, because I want to pull those down.
I would be interested in probably our audience as well, like what would be some of those main differences in terms of the way you work side by side your more neurotypical workers? Is there a way you could frame that? Is there something obvious, or?
Well, first of all, the way I like to look at it, and it does kind of tie back to the Judy Singer quote you shared earlier, in that everyone is different in their own way, and we all have to meet each other halfway, and we all need to learn our individual ways of working and how we can make that work as a collective. But I have kind of noticed that some of my autistic traits that might be seen as a negative are actually quite good strengths. So I'm not so good with unwritten social rules, but in many ways that's kind of powerful because I'm not constrained by them. I'm not worried so much about who I'm going to offend or what I'm going to do. I'm also quite direct, so there's less time wasting. There's more just sort of getting right to the heart of it. And I've met people who appreciate those things about me, and I've learned to appreciate the things that my neurotypical peers do.
I know what you're talking about. As a German, I've been told very often you're very direct, and so there are some people who absolutely appreciate, some other ones you have to be a little bit more nuanced. But no, thanks very much for sharing your experience. Much appreciated. I have a question for Jen. So Jen is our lead coach and you know, a wealth of experience. And I think it would be worthwhile sharing, like, how does there's probably no average day, but how does a day at work look like? And what are some of the challenges you, our professional team, have to deal with? That would be fascinating to hear.
Sure. I mean, definitely it's my day. I never know what it's going to look like. So even though I might have scheduled things in, I think when you're working with people in general, that it can always change. But I suppose really it's about my role being twofold. So it's around working with our internal team, so our consulting team or anyone else that's been employed, and sort of from a consultant perspective, it's supporting them starting through recruitment, all the way through to working with them on a regular basis and really getting to know them and understanding them and identifying with them some sort of areas of either professional or personal development they would like some support with, and doing that on a continual basis as much as they may require, but at the same time certainly building that empowerment and that self-confidence. Because we work with a number of consultants who have a range of experience, so they might have come from no work experience because they might be straight from school or straight from university, all the way up to people who've worked in a number of different settings. So it really varies on the individual as to what type of support I might be sort of working with them on. But like I say, it tends to be sort of either on that professional level. So it might be something along the lines of helping them. We know that a number of our team are very conscientious. We also know, like Simon was saying, they can be very focused on detail, and that's fantastic. But that can also lead to them working exceptionally long hours. That can lead to some exhaustion. That can then have an impact on sleep. And so part of my role might be to support them to balance that work-life balance, so that it's not going to then have a negative impact on them outside of their work. It could also be something much more personal. So it could be that they might want to build on their social interaction skills, either with their work colleagues or outside of work. And that's something that, if that's what they identify they want to support with, then that's what we might be working on. So we might do some things on a regular basis, as well as doing some things more on an ad hoc basis. So if there's some sort of level of anxiety that might occur, then they know that they can reach out to us, and we can sort of put some support in place as to what they might require. And then I think on a secondary level, it's working with our clients. So it's really about raising that awareness. It's all about not just ticking the box for diversity, but it's all about that inclusion. And so it's working with our clients to make sure that they're using sort of autism-friendly approaches, and that can be from their recruitment style all the way up to having some of our team in place and assessing what the workplace might be like. So they're making some reasonable adjustments and allowances to make sure that it suits more of a neurodiverse employees. So it's really working in both angles and sort of constantly making sure that we're supporting from both avenues.
Let me just quickly add to that, sorry, before I come to you, Simon. This afternoon, I was just in Wolf's head office, and I had meetings with various executives, and they all stressed the importance of the coach and the ability to basically understand nuances and identify any challenges coming up. So the sessions you have and the other coaches, like on a regular basis, several times a week, with the client team members, is not to underestimate in order to make that success sustainable and for every participant involved. Sorry, Simon, you were saying?
Yeah, I just wanted to pick up on what Jen was saying, that one of the amazing things about Auticon, the whole business model, is that you're placing autistic consultants, hence the name, into different companies, but you're providing a job coach to support the individual, and that's if you like, that's the gold standard, that you don't just help them find a job and then abandon them. You're there on the journey, as little or as much as the person wants. But not every company has that luxury of having a job coach available. But I wanted to say that, for those companies who don't have somebody like Jen, there are many small adjustments or accommodations that any workplace can make to support the autistic person as an employee. And all it takes is kind of asking the person, what do you want? What do you need? And often these things are not expensive. Some examples might be that if an autistic person finds that their workspace is too noisy, they might, because autistic people, some of them are hypersensitive to sounds. It may just be that they request wearing headphones whilst they're working. It's a small accommodation which would make work much more comfortable. Or it could be that there'll be, maybe if there isn't a formal job coach, it could be that somebody in the organization is assigned to be that person's buddy, just to check in with them, to see how they are, and to see what is causing stress and so forth. So it's just not to forget that autistic people need support, and they're entitled to it because autism is a recognized disability. But it doesn't need to be kind of expensive for the organization.
Yeah, no, good point. Ashlea, I think you wanted to say something. I saw a raised hand.
Yes, please. I've got a few things. This is great, and I agree with everything. I'd like to build on that by saying that, might I suggest, the gold standard goes even further than that and looks at career progression and career planning. So I, at Christmas, achieved the very first internal promotion of my career. It took nearly 12 years for that to happen. And autistic people, we're just like anyone else. We've got dreams, we've got goals, we've got plans. And I was hoping I might talk a little bit about my own workplace setup, if that's okay. Yeah, great. So I've been working with a consulting firm in Canberra called Synergy Group Australia for the last nearly 2 years now. And I have found this workplace to be very, very neurodiversity friendly for me. I'll tell you about some of the accommodations I have. They are all free or very, very low cost and very easy to do. In consulting, we love these things called hot desking environments. As an autistic person, I don't love them. They are painful. It is so hard to get settled every day. So an easy fix is I have a permanent desk. It's that simple, and my productivity increases because I can get.
I think the pendulum will swing back.
Yeah, and the other one I'm going to talk to you about is a thing I call Friday afternoon recharge time. So every Friday at 12 noon, I go offline. I don't talk to anyone. I just have time to just recharge my brain, and it's fantastic because yeah, I just find by about 12 noon on Friday that my brain's absolutely fried. So I have this supported time. I work my full work week before 12 noon Friday, and then I am out. And it's fantastic. And actually, I will share one more thing. We also have a really strong culture of learning here. So if if something isn't quite autism friendly, I am completely safe and completely free to just say something, and we'll have a conversation about it. And then we will all learn how we can all do better. It's this ongoing, constant learning conversation, I think.
It's fantastic, Ashley. Thanks very much, because it's just a seaming let's transition to my last question, which is really for the entire panel. And so the question is really, what advice would you offer companies looking to explore working with neurodiverse teams? Now, the obvious one is give Auticon a call, but leaving that aside, is maybe the top 1 or 2 suggestions you would have. Maybe we start with Jen, Ashley, and then Simon, please. 1 or 2 suggestions.
Well, from my perspective, I would say it needs to start with their recruitment, because we know that so many autistic people sort of can fail at that hurdle purely because there's a lot of traditional processes in place that do not make it easy for someone to perhaps even get to an interview or through an interview. And regardless of their talent, that might be where that then ends. So I would say certainly looking at that. And then I think secondly, I'd say looking at their workplace culture and really working on that inclusion, and for everybody to be involved as part of that, and trying to maybe think differently about having things like the hot desking, and being able to make some of those reasonable adjustments like we've sort of discussed. So having that open mind to do that and make that change.
Okay, super. Thanks for that. Ashley, I think we lost Simon, so you have another 2 minutes to come back online.
So I have 2. The first one being, you need to adopt the mindset that autism and neurodiversity in general is a completely natural human thing. This is what normal looks like, and this is what okay looks like. So you need to adopt the mindset that this is normal, this is okay. And the other thing I would say is you need to treat us and view us as individuals, because no 2 neurodiverse people are exactly alike. We all need different things. That's my 2, and we don't have Simon.
No, very, very good. Spot on. I think while I'm just using the slot.
Okay.
Simon is back.
Yeah, sorry, the internet is a little bit patchy, but I got most of what Ashley was saying, and it's fantastic, Ashley, that you're joining us and giving us, your personal perspective. If I could go back to the fact that you got your diagnosis quite late.
Yep.
Age 29.
Yeah.
Because we know that autism, it doesn't just start at age 29, right? And you were talking about how you felt almost like you derived on the wrong planet. And a lot of autistic people describe this. You probably know there's even a website called Wrong Planet.
Yep.
But it really nicely, it captures this idea of feeling different. Yeah. Feeling a little bit on the margins, like you can see everybody else chatting and having communication and social relationships, and you feel you're kind of like an observer. And it's so important that other people, so-called neurotypical people, realize what that experience is like, because it must feel like, that you're being excluded sometimes. And we, the neurotypical majority, let's say, I think the responsibility is on us to make sure that the autistic person doesn't feel excluded, feels the opposite. So inclusion is really important. The other thing I was going to say is that we use the word neurodiversity a lot, and we should just remind our audience that neurodiversity is like other forms of diversity. We're now very good at work in thinking about gender diversity, about ethnic diversity. As a planet, we're thinking about biodiversity. That we need difference. We need to embrace difference. It's really important at so many levels to make sure that nobody is left out, and that all individuals are treated as equal and given equal dignity, equal respect, equal opportunities. And neurodiversity is just the latest example of this. So in some ways, although we're discussing it as if it's something unfamiliar, I'm hoping that within a very short time, this will just be regarded as very ordinary. Like, how did we ever imagine we could have, workplaces or colleges or anything else, any other institutions, without diversity?
I couldn't agree more. Maybe I just provide maybe only two quick suggestions for companies who are interested in neurodiversity. So don't underestimate the amount of coaching required in order to ensure long-term success. That's one appeal. And the other one is don't underinvest in terms of training and awareness, because in order for this concept, the neurodiverse employment strategy, to work, the business needs to buy in. It's not enough that HR or diversity and inclusion is excited about the topic. The business needs, so line managers need to buy into it. And that takes work. And if I maybe, can share a global perspective, you hear a German accent, but I've been at home in Australia for over 21 years. So Australia is home. But if I compare our business model in Europe to Australia, it feels that Australia is probably 2 or 3 years behind what is very mainstream in Europe in terms of embracing the concept of neurodiversity and working with autism. Here, I think we still need, in Australia, we need to do more. And it feels we're at the verge of it. It's happening, but we need to do much more. And so I appeal to corporates, find out, get excited about it, reach out for help if you need to. But if you want to do it yourself, that's fine as well. But don't underestimate what it takes in order to, come up with a successful model. So that's probably, I would pause here in terms of the question we had, and I would like to open it to the audience. I think I see one question here, and Ashlea, this is for you in terms of very specific in terms of your day-to-day work environment. The audience would like to know in terms of how do you drive innovation? What do you contribute? Are there any examples where you felt proud of contributing or a process?
Sorry, you're breaking up a bit there. Could you repeat the question?
Yeah, there was a question from the audience.
Sure.
We're interested whether you had any practical example at your work in the consulting work that you're doing, or in the UX work, where you were driving innovative thinking as part of a team, or some ideas you brought forward. Is there any stories you would like to share? That was the question there.
I mean, there's a few ways of looking at it. So a big part of UX kind of is innovation. So it is something I do without really thinking. Trying to think. I also do a lot of internal work. So I also lead our diversity and inclusion practice for our digital and technology service line, and I've been looking at inclusive recruitment practices and looking at how we might sort of flip the more traditional approach but still achieve our goals. It's funny. It's like, I mean, I don't have like things that I've done. It's just part of how I do my work. It's a bit hard for me to explain it. Yeah.
No, that's a good answer. Absolutely. Another question came in that's interesting. Jane, I'm sure you have a perspective on that. What would be your advice to recruiters or managers considering hiring neurodiverse people who might not know how to go about it?
Well, yeah, obviously you can engage a company that might have a lot more sort of expertise in that area. But if you wanted to also go about it yourself, I would sort of suggest looking into what you're currently doing. You might want to think about working with some autistic people on doing that and getting their input on how you might change some of those things. But it's looking at, yes, still it may be doing some more workplace sort of related tasks rather than doing more of a formal interview-based task. So having some people maybe come in for a day and get to see what they're actually doing and judging them on that rather than judging them on their ability to maybe make eye contact in an interview or something. So there's lots of sort of books and things out there that you can start to access. But I would certainly recommend either engaging a specific company that can help with that, or working ideally with autistic community group or something that can help sort of give some of that insight to help companies to change that.
Simon?
Yeah, just building on Jen's point about if you have the traditional kind of interview as your way of selecting candidates, that could actually be a form of discrimination against candidates who have a disability in that area. So if you're expecting the candidate to be able to be comfortable with eye contact, that was Jen's example, or with verbal communication, and those are the areas of disability with the candidate. It's almost like saying to somebody who's in a wheelchair, to get this job, you have to be able to walk up the stairs, unaided. It's kind of unfair, but autism is sometimes called an invisible disability. But, Jen's point is, give the candidate something like a task that's relevant to the job that they're going to be considered for, so that they have the opportunity to shine, to show that what they can do, maybe to a higher level than other candidates. Just kind of make it a level playing field. But we do have to remember that we're in the kind of domain of human rights, the right to work, but also, the right to have your disability recognized under the law. So companies need to be aware of their responsibilities.
I mean, spot on, and I think it's very worthwhile. The traditional recruitment approach, as you mentioned, where you have a job description and you do a competency-based interview, doesn't lend itself for neurodiverse hiring or recruitment process. So we fundamentally re-engineered basically our assessment process, and in order to not fall into those pitfalls. So now, let me just quickly pick another question here. Are there any existing policies made for neurodiverse people to be followed by the organizations? If not, do you believe they should be put in place? Open for the panel. Any views? Yes, Ashlea, thank you.
Yes, there should be, and they should be written by neurodiverse people. Yeah.
Okay, good point. Good.
Yeah, maybe I could just add that we don't want every company to have to reinvent the wheel. So there may be some guidelines out there already that other companies have created. I know that the company Universal Music, they published guidelines on how to be a good employer in terms of neurodiversity almost a year ago now. So you can find that for free on the internet, and it's written for any industry actually, even though they're in the music industry. But I completely agree with Ashlea that that coming up with these guidelines needs to be done in consultation with autistic people. If you're thinking about writing guidelines on gender diversity, you wouldn't do it just from a male perspective. That would be, counter to the whole goal. Or if it was about ethnic diversity, you wouldn't do it just from a white perspective, for example. So, inclusion is key.
Yeah, no, very, very good point. I'm just looking at another question coming in. We still have a few minutes, which is great. How to behave with a sense of empathy and support with people with neurodiversity. I'm not trying to interpret the question, and maybe I just leave it as it is, and I just leave it for your interpretation. Any views on the question? How to behave with a sense of empathy and support with people with neurodiversity? Yes, please, Ashlea.
I would say it starts by building trust. It starts by recognizing that we're all human and we're all different in our own way, and working out how we can meet each other halfway and understand each other. That's what we do here, and it works really well.
I like that.
Yeah, and I would just add to that, and Ashlea made comment of this earlier, that it's really about knowing that person as an individual, regardless of any diagnosis they might have, because I think you know, we are all individuals. We do all have personal strengths. We do have areas that we might want to work on. So as long as you know that person as an individual and you're not being tokenistic, but you're actually sort of working with them and supporting them in a way that they've communicated to you, then I think that's showing that empathy and support.
Yes, Simon, thank you.
Well, maybe I'll just add that, you know, empathy and support should be core values towards any worker, you know, in any company, right? So we're not just living in the days where the boss gives orders and and expects the worker just to perform the tasks like a robot. You know, the worker is a person with feelings, and who knows what's happening in their own personal life. So empathy should be part of how we manage people anyway. And the same with support. You know, everyone needs different kinds of support. That's why we have, you know, annual appraisals to really sort of understand the person. And autistic people and other neurodiverse people, of course, they should be treated with empathy and support, and their needs may be a little bit different.
But just on that, as I said earlier, I think you can boost that degree of empathy collectively across a group of people by actually providing that training and awareness beforehand. Because very often, like, employees just literally don't understand the concept of neurodiversity or autism. And once you give them a chance to understand and learn, and it's actually a fascinating topic, that empathy can be boosted enormously. So now I have one great question here. So do we have any data on the proportion of people on the spectrum in the general population? Yes, we do, but I hand over to the panel.
The data that I'm aware of for Australia is they believe it's around 1 in 70 people are autistic in Australia.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, and
can we top that? That's the best.
So shall I? We just published a paper yesterday, and this was data from the UK on millions of kids. So it's a school-based study, but now finding that the rate of autism, the prevalence, is about 1 in 50. So we previously thought we thought it was 1%. It's now 2%, and that's, you know, it's the largest study on prevalence that's ever been published. People can find it online.
Thank you. Good. I'm conscious of the time. It's 6:56. If there's no more burning question, here we go. One more. I think that's a good one. Question from some of so who might not have been diagnosed yet? What are some of the first symptoms? And is there any tool to be diagnosed? That's an interesting one. Who would like to pick that one up? And it's obviously very relevant. And yes, Ashley?
I'll take it. You know, it's funny. I guess, like, I can reflect on my own journey. When I was starting to explore it, what I did was I wrote down all my memories of all my years feeling like I was an alien, and I started kind of Googling those things and looking for common ground. I already kind of knew I was looking in the neighborhood of the spectrum, but I wasn't so sure. So I started Googling my memories, and there are online tools. I mean, some of them, I mean, I tried lots of different kind of quizzes, but there was a website, I can't remember what it's called off the top of my head, but it was amazing, and it was written by autistic people, and it talked about what the traits meant for them in real life, and there were multiple people answering for multiple different traits, so that it was sort of capturing the different types of diversity that might exist. So lots of different people commenting on what focused interests might mean for them. So yeah, that's kind of what I did. A lot of Googling and a lot of writing down memories.
Thank you, Simon.
Yeah, I can just add to that we developed something called the AQ, which is a questionnaire. It stands for the Autism Spectrum Quotient, and it's 50 questions. And if, you know, so you can find it online. For example, it's on the Wired magazine website. If someone scores more than 32 out of 50, it's not diagnostic. It just says you've got a much higher number of autistic traits, and then it's down to the individual if they want to pursue a diagnosis. You know, ultimately it's individual choice whether somebody wants that label. But you know, the label shouldn't carry any stigma. The label, the diagnosis, should actually be your stepping stone to getting the support you need, whether it's at work or anywhere else.
And into a new facet, into a new world as well. So I'm really conscious.
Sorry.
Yes, Ashlea, very quickly. Yeah.
I was just going to say the label is whatever you want it to be, and if you want it to be positive, it absolutely is.
Yeah.
I think that's a wonderful closing remark. So I think I'm really conscious of everyone's time, and we said 7 o'clock. So let me just say a huge thank you to the three of you. It has been absolutely inspiring and insightful. A big thank you to all of you who participated and logged in. I hope it was useful, and please continue to check the ACS New South Wales website for any other events. But let me just close here. Thank you so much, and have a wonderful evening or a good morning for wherever we're.
Bye, everyone.
Thank you.